Reaper by Charles Diggs, Chapter 1. It was a cloudless night in San Diego. The lights and sounds of the city filled the darkness. Those sounds covered the sniffling of a weeping woman as a gun was held on her and her husband, so no one heard her. Gregory had forced the young couple into the dark alley with a gun. He was wearing a gray hoodie and jeans. The couple was wearing fancy clothes for a night out in the town, as well as warm coats for the cold. They had been walking home from a nearby restaurant when the mugger had pulled a pistol on them and motioned for them to enter the alley. "Give me your purse and don't say a word," Greg said. "Please, just take it," Eustace said. Eustace handed over her purse before the mugger shot the man first. She was frozen in shock as she watched her husband fall dead with a hole in his head. Greg then turned the gun on the woman. "Please don't," the woman said with a whimper, with her tears streaming down her face. The mugger pulled the trigger again and rushed off. Reaper watched the whole scene, including the woman's death, and the mugger leaving the two bodies behind after hiding his pistol in the front pouch of his backpack before zipping it up. His sensitive ears tracked the man's footfalls as he moved away, and Greg's slowing heart rate. The mugger strolled into his apartment building, carrying his backpack with straps over both shoulders. Greg took the stairs up to his room on the third floor. He felt something brush up against him, and he looked around to find no one around before continuing on. Arriving at his room, he opened the door to his apartment and closed it behind him. Once inside, Greg dumped the contents of his haul that night on the bed and started to shift through them. "Hello, Gregory. My, that's much more than earlier this morning. Your earnings are improving," Reaper said. He pulled his gun out and pointed at Reaper. It was in the form of a young white male dressed in average street clothes. "Who are you?" the mugger asked. "I am someone you will make famous. Dodging the police will not only add to the challenge of the kill. I am so in need of a challenge these days," Reaper said, his tone polite and comfortable. "Get the hell out of here or I'll kill you," Greg yelled, pulling the hammer back. Reaper laughed coldly as he glanced at the pistol. "Oh, I won't be the one dying, my friend. You've been a naughty boy, Gregory. I can only imagine how sweet you'll taste," Reaper said. Greg fired his pistol at Reaper, only to find no one in front of him. Instead, Reaper was now behind him and whispered in his ear. "Did you get him?" Reaper asked. Greg jumped. "Ah!" Greg exclaimed. Reaper's hand came into view as it burst out of the mugger's stomach, which sprayed blood all over the carpet. The mugger collapsed onto the floor. He tried to crawl away and made it to the door before he turned around. Reaper licked his fingers and sucked the blood off each finger before he said, I was right. You're just as sweet as I imagined." Greg saw Reaper's face stretch and change, ending with a mouthful of sharp teeth that seemed to emerge out of nowhere as Reaper opened his mouth and grinned. "Oh, God!" Greg exclaimed. "I would think in your position you might want to not end things on his bad side before you die. Just a helpful suggestion," Reaper said. "Please don't," Greg said, his face showing his agony. "Now that sounds familiar. Isn't that what your last victim said before she died?" Reaper said. Reaper had an amused smirk on his face. His fingernails extended into claws inches from the mugger's face. Reaper used them to slice open the mugger's throat in one quick movement. The mugger choked on his own blood before Reaper's eyes, dipping his fingers in the mugger's blood. He wrote Reaper on the wall. Reaper turned to the mugger's corpse. Thus shall the world come to know me by name, and from my works evildoers everywhere will learn to fear and remember that for me they are not safe, Reaper said as he admired his handiwork. Sirens could be heard in the distance as Reaper withdrew. Detective Ortez entered the busy crime scene and began to look around to get his bearings. Police and crime scene photographers were milling around, taking pictures and collecting evidence around the room. Ortez moved to the window to look down on the street and saw the chief's car as it pulled up. Ortez was a fit man with short black hair, standing at about 5'11". People who didn't know him or hadn't seen his work thought he was a supermodel with a badge. It would have been even more attractive if he'd spent more on his clothes and didn't wear white sneakers with his gray suit. When asked about his choice of wardrobe, Ortez would often say, "It's comfortable." His general attitude and body language, even during the most formal occasions, reflected that statement. If his superiors hadn't insisted on it, Ortez would have been far more comfortable in a leather jacket and blue jeans, wearing his hair down to his shoulders. The chief pulled in and parked alongside the curb. He and Graves stepped out of the vehicle. Heading up the stairs, past the news reporters outside, they both walked over to Ortez on the other side of the police tape in the room. Graves was a brunette with long hair that hung down freely to his shoulder blades. Like Ortez, his face was clean shaven, and he was also wearing a suit. His was black, as opposed to the detective's gray. While in its own right he could be considered an attractive man, compared to Ortez, he was only above average in the looks department. "Detective Fernando Ortez, welcome to our crime scene, Mr. Ortez said. "David Graves. Just call me your local necromancer," David Graves said. Graves turned to the chief. "If the rest of your people have gathered all they need, then I'll need them to leave. Ortez here can remain. I can use him," Graves said. "All right, the scene's yours. Tell me if you need anything, and thanks again for getting here so quickly," the chief said. Graves and the chief shook hands. "No problem, chief. I'll probably hold you to that," Graves said. He smiled at the chief, and the chief smiled back. The chief exited the scene. A quizzical look appeared on Ortez's face. He turned to Graves, filled with curiosity. "I'm sorry, but did you just say necromancer?" Ortez asked, confused. "This is a supernatural crime, detective. You'd be surprised how normal my abilities are in such a setting," Graves said. "You're serious?" Ortez asked. "I'm very serious about what I do, detective," Graves told him. "What am I supposed to call you? Mr. Necromancer, Lord of the Dead, or something else?" Ortez joked, expecting someone to jump out and say this was part of some prank or something. "I have a pretty good sense of humor, officer, but I don't like someone mocking my profession, especially when you haven't earned the right," Graves said with feeling of annoyance starting to show. "It's detective, sir," Ortez said, not liking his tone. Graves looked him right in the eye. "And it's Graves to you, detective. Now let me make this abundantly clear for you, detective. I'm offering you an opportunity to learn things you would normally not have access to. With this new knowledge, you can be a credit to your department. At the very least, you can use this newfound knowledge to help save lives. You feel you have nothing for me to teach you, or you don't want to be involved, then turn around and get the hell out of my crime scene," Graves said in a tone that demanded respect. Ortiz took a deep breath, calming his anger. "Sorry, Mr. Graves. Where would you like to start?" Ortez said, doing his best to show the man the respect he deserved. Graves crouched down next to the body and looked it over. "Just call me Graves and come over here," the necromancer said. Ortez came over. Graves passed his hand over the body but didn't touch it. A focused look appeared on his face. Could I ask what exactly you're doing? Me being new at all this, Ortez said, his tone serious for the most part. Graves paused over the puncture wounds on the body's neck. He offered Ortez his free hand. What? Ortez asked. Take my hand and you'll find out. Ortez reluctantly took his hand. After touching Graves' hand, he immediately let go and jumped back, looking at the body. What the hell was that? Ortez asked, breathing heavily as he stared at the mugger's body visibly shaken. What did you see? Graves asked. Ortez just stared at the body. Detective Ortez, I want you to take a deep breath and then answer my question. What did you see once you touched my hand? Graves asked in a calm tone of voice. Ortez took a deep breath and looked at Graves. I saw a person with a large black aura around him, like a shadow. His eyes were the color of pitch black that seemed to go on forever. I saw him kill this man, draw something from him, some kind of red aura. Then he seemed to draw it into itself with the blood, Ortez told Graves. What you saw was a revenant, a vampire that possesses the bodies of the evil dead. I say evil because that is what they hunt. Criminals and those of evil intent. Judging by this man's file, this one was a mugger. Pickpocketing escalating to armed robbery. Seems the mugger killed at least 2 other people before he himself was murdered. I imagine the vampire was watching him, and that final act clinched it, Graves explained. Why criminals? They could hunt anyone else, Ortez said. Actually, they can't. They exist under different rules than most vamps. What will hurt other species might not hurt them, and vice versa. The innocent have a natural protection against them. Have you heard about wards? Graves replied. You mean like a cross? Ortez asked. Yeah, that'll do. Picture any innocent person with a big freaking cross on them. While crosses don't mean anything by themselves to revenants, innocence does. If you're a good person, they can't hurt you, Graves said. Why don't crosses work? Ortez asked. Revenant inhabit bodies. Technically, this changes the nature of what can hurt them. Holy water and crosses don't mean shit. If you do something evil and they've made you, consider yourself screwed. So my advice to you would be to keep your nose clean and stay that way. Morally questionable is one thing. Evil is something else. If you have to question it, don't do it, Graves explained. Sounds fair enough. Same concept as heaven and hell or karma. What else should I know? Ortez asked. As you can see from the body, they are quite vicious by nature. This one has a particularly sadistic side. Most of them feed and don't take their time at it. This one drew things out before he even laid a finger on the guy. He wanted to feed on the victim's fear first. Not that the mugger didn't have it coming, Graves said with a shrug. You mentioned that he watched this guy before he killed him. Is there any significance to that? Can't he tell if the guy was evil or not? He can sense it. The evil in such a person calls to him. Any revenant could find this mugger blindfolded, Graves answered. Then why would he watch him? I'm not doubting your leap of intuition, but in my experience, you should question the why. What made you think that this particular revenant would take the extra time to track him visually? Ortez asked. It's the impression I get. Most revenant are opportunists, kind of like sharks. They smell blood in the water and head towards the source. This one picks his prey. I can feel that about him, Graves said, his expression thoughtful. Getting up, Graves headed towards the police tape at the edge of the crime scene. Follow me, detective. We can come back after I check out this hunch, Graves said. Graves ducked underneath the police tape. What's the rush? The bodies have been moved already, Ortez asked. Ortez followed him out onto the street because that means their auras are dissipating. The stronger the present, the clearer the images things will be. Much of necromancy, at least when it comes to investigation, is following hunches, because time is of the essence, Graves said. Graves walked away from the scene in a hurry and headed down the stairs to the street. Ortez tried to keep up. Cameras flashed and reporters tried to talk to them as they passed. Graves led them to the second scene without stopping to get his bearings or ask anyone for directions. Once they were far enough away, they began talking again. Sounds like being a detective. I guess I can understand that, Ortez said. Some things do not change no matter what world you step into, detective, Graves said. They hurried on and arrived at the second scene in no time, and Ortez flashed his credentials to the officer regarding the scene. Go on in, sir, the young officer said. Ducking under the tape, they entered the second scene, and Graves looked around, his eyes stopping on a spot near where the bodies were marked. He pointed one spot out to Ortez. Graves then pointed to the rooftop nearby, and then at a couple chalk lines on the pavement. The vampire was there, and the couple along with the mugger were right here. It's clear that the vampire was standing here from the impressions he left. When he jumped out and followed the mugger, this revenant is a serial killer. He's picking the most tasty of morsels. My guess it would be murderers, rapists, anyone else who directly harms their victims. So they are more evil in his eyes? Ortez asked. It leaves a deeper stain on the soul. Think of it like a dessert or feast when they can get it. This one is focusing only on the filet mignon, or cream of the crop of the criminal world. That leads me to believe one of two things. Either something in his past has caused this pattern of behavior, and it's revenge, or he's in it for the challenge. His reward, when it's all over, is that he eats like a king, Graves answered. It's unsettling to think that to him, creatures like him, we are just food. I can't get over that, Ortez replied. Just be glad that they are so highly selective, and you aren't on the menu, Graves told him. The more I see, the more I agree with you. I can feel a cold presence here, and I can hear an equally heartless laughter. But I don't see anyone. This presence you are talking about, it's like an echo, right? Something we all leave behind, Ortez asked. Yes, everyone does. Necromancers can pick out the supernatural presences that others don't notice, Graves said. You're training me to be like you, Ortez said. Graves smiled and headed back to the street. He paused at the inside of the tape. Graves quietly listened to the sounds of the city, not looking at Ortez for a short time. I was wondering when you would ask that question. Then again, you have been dealing with a lot on your first night, Graves said. So it's true, Ortez said. We are a rarity, you and I, detective. Most people can't sense what we do. The thing is, you could have gone the rest of your life and gone untapped. If you want, we can stop here. Right now, you are slightly aware of the supernatural, but you're not far enough in that you can't live a normal life if you quit now. I wouldn't think any less of you if you did, Graves said. I'm a cop. I'll do my duty, Ortez replied. Now if you go through with this, Graves said with all seriousness. What do you mean? Ortez asked. When I approached you for this, the brass had already given their okay. I felt it was necessary that they understood the situation, and they figured on their own that you could handle it. Your record speaks for itself. In the past, you have shown great potential in your use of your intuition, Graves said. Enough beating around the bush. What did you talk to the brass about? A necromancer is an outsider, Detective Ortez. Learn from me, you will no longer be an official part of the department, at least not in your current unit. Most likely, you'll be a local outside consultant, Graves explained, and looked Ortez right back. meeting his eyes. You mean I can't be a cop anymore? Ortez asked, the sudden realization shocking him to the core. Graves looked at him, feeling sympathy for the younger man. I can't just walk away, Ortez said. I'm sure about this. Once you make this choice, there is no turning back the clock. You can't undo this, Detective. After this moment, you will work for me, but you'll get to keep your badge until this is over. After that, the brass decides if they want to keep you in an official capacity, Graves said. They headed back to Ortez's car, with Graves in the passenger seat. Once inside, they fastened their safety belts, and Ortez turned to Graves. I understand. Where to, boss?